Good morning, good evening, for wherever you are in the world. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the German American Business Association's Watts and Waffles series of events. Thank you for your attendance. Watts and Waffles is focused on topics around energy and the environment. And my name is Phil Keys, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm a senior manager in marketing communications at Intertrust. And Intertrust is a Silicon Valley-based software company specializing in trusted distributed computing, and we are active in the energy industry. Today, I'm honored to host Dan Klink, founder and CEO of East African Power, for a presentation and discussion on opportunities and challenges of small-scale renewables in East Africa. To further introduce Dan, East African Power is a renewable energy development company based in Kigali, Rwanda, focused on development, finance, construction, and operations of hydro and solar power projects in sub-Saharan Africa. Dan founded Empowering Villages, a nonprofit organization focused on energy access, environmental sustainability, and economic development. For the past 15 years, he has worked as an entrepreneur and business executive, having held leadership positions in a broad range of industries, including energy finance, manufacturing, biotech, and construction in Asian, North American, and African marketplaces. So Dan, thank you for coming today. And before we go any further, I'd like to introduce our hostess, Carolyn Renaud, Executive Director of GABA, to say a few words. Carolyn?
Thank you, Phil. Good morning or good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I'm Caroline Renaud, the Executive Director of GABA, the German American Business Association. We're very happy to be the co-host for today's events. So just a few words about GABA before we get started. GABA is an alliance of corporations, organizations, and professionals with the purpose of strengthening transatlantic business. GABA is a nonprofit organization promoting business between California and Germany, and we are only funded by membership and event fees, and usually do a lot of panel discussion on hot technology topics, do networking events, and help our members to get connected. Since we can't do that in person at the moment, we've been doing a series of virtual events because we find it very important that our community stays connected and still want to give our GABA members the opportunity to exchange some ideas. Most of our events are organized by our special interest groups, and today's event is organized by our cleantech special interest group, and I'd like to thank Florian Korb, who's the co-chair of our cleantech interest group, for getting us into this event, and also for Intertrust for sponsoring the event. And yeah, that's about GABA. And now I'd like to give it back to Phil to start our conversation for this morning.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Just to go over a bit about the ground rules of today. Dan's presentation will be around 30 minutes, and we'll follow that with Q&A. We certainly appreciate the audience if you have any questions. If you look below on your interface on the Zoom, you should see down and to the right, there's a Q&A icon. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A view and in there, and then we'll select some for the Q&A session after the presentation. So without further ado, Dan, right.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning. Good morning, Carolyn, and good morning, audience. So thank you for this opportunity to present small-scale renewable opportunities in East Africa. As Phil mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder for East African Power. Our base is in Kigali, Rwanda. This is for what we consider a great gateway for businesses that are trying to look at opportunities across Africa. So that has been my home for the past 10 years. We've been able to realize investments in 5 utility scale projects. We have 5 others in construction, 25 in development. Outside of that, we run a renewable energy engineering office primarily in solar and hydropower technologies. So just want to highlight, as this is the German-American Business Association, that we are a Power Africa partner. We've worked with USTDA, DFC, and various American partners to realize the projects that we're in, and we find them to be very important players for us as we move towards our goal of realizing 1,000 megawatts of development in small scale, primarily small scale hydro and solar power opportunities over the next 10 years. Also want to highlight that over the years, we're very thankful for the partnerships that we've seen from Germany, primarily from the KfW with their Get Fit program. If it wasn't for KfW and this work, we'd probably be 5 or 10 years back when it comes to conducive regulatory environments. So we've seen a significant amount of work that has taken place most recently in Zambia, but prior to that, Uganda, and specifically Rwanda. And I can thank a few other partnerships. The first utility scale project we worked on was 50% funded from GIZ NDEV, so we're thankful for that participation. We have a 3 megawatt hydropower plant, which is 30% funded from KfW. We've had an EPC partner on the first utility scale solar power plant in East Africa, in eastern Rwanda, and so we had an EPC partner called ID Mason out of Bavaria. We've worked with Osberger, Germany, which has an excellent cross-flow turbine technology. E.ON has provided some seed capital for our electric pressure cooker, addressing clean cooking, and we look forward to future partnerships. So I will share screen now and show a brief video, and apologies if it's a bit choppy. We'll get into some basics of this afterwards. Thank you.
Development begins with energy and is measured by entrepreneurship, education, enjoyment, and the environment. We are not talking up lines and living, but investing in and with the local communities for continual growth. Energy is kickstarting community cooperatives and delivering skilled work opportunities. New libraries and learning centers are giving prospects for advancement and preparing the next generation for the future. The unemployed become the welders, the seamstresses, teachers, managers, and leaders of tomorrow. All this comes back to renewable energy, and by being developmentally minded, we are redirecting the future for both individuals as well as the whole communities, partnering with them to empower and enable them to reach their full potential. It's great to give small donations, and any bit of generosity goes a long way. However, by partnering with investors, we are creating a long-term sustainable impact on those who have never had electricity before. The opportunity is endless. This is us. This is East African Power.
So thank you for, hopefully this was clear and not too choppy with that presentation. I'm just going to start this, sorry. Very good. So today I'm going to highlight some of the opportunities and challenges for small scale renewables with a particular focus on East Africa. So as you know, in the renewable space, There are many technologies, and of course, when we look at what has been done in wind and geothermal, we're typically looking at medium or large size projects. When we come to small scale, under definition is typically between 1 megawatt and 10 megawatts, although some include some of the smaller projects. So the focus of today's presentation of highlighting is a little bit more on the solar and hydropower opportunities. I'll give a specific case of Rwanda, examining the sector opportunities that exist, and then we'll narrow down with a case study presentation of our first containerized technology for small scale hydro. So let's jump big picture and look at the reason why we are here today. And certainly when we look at the number of people without access to electricity, I mean, it's 2020. If you can believe it, that there are over 600 million people in Africa today without access to power. And so where the opportunities exist, they are tremendous, and certainly we can talk about the generation side of the business, we can talk about the distribution side, we can talk about off-grid opportunities, solar home system opportunities, but right now I think it's important for us just to kind of grasp and pull in that number of what it is for 1 billion people without access to power, and the majority of them in Africa, the majority of them rural populations. Big picture thinking when we look at the opportunities and where we are today and what the world will look like in 2050. So 60% of Africa is rural. What we see is that 1 billion are in rural communities. That by 2050, the labor force is going to be nearly 1 billion, 800 million that's projected, 300 million that are rural. Today's population across Africa is 1.25 billion. In just 30 years from now, we're seeing that double from 1.25 to 2.5 billion. And near the end of the century, we'll see nearly half of the world's population being African. This to be said, when it boils down to what opportunities exist, I think it's very obvious looking at these charts to see what kind of demographics exist. Discussing specifically about demographic dividends, it's a unique moment where the number of active workers relative to the population stands at its highest ratio. So this being said, is an immense opportunity for all businesses across all sectors, specifically certainly for the energy needs that are quite obvious, but also the challenges and the risk is that if the institutions, governments, and if the infrastructure is not there, this can present a very significant threat to social unrest. Jumping down to the opportunities, I think we can kind of narrow them down to grid and off-grid opportunities. Certainly the numbers that I mentioned before. Today there's 600 million people without access to power. What is projected in our SDG, the UN goal of universal access to electricity, which is really at the heart of where our company is and the work that we do, the opportunities that we see, is that there's going to be a tremendous momentum towards trying to reach and provide that access to power. Even if the 600 million are reached, then we can see from the population curves of the previous one is that there will be an additional 600 million without access to power within 30 years. So the needs are profound. And generally speaking, if we look at where the opportunities exist, we look into kind of 3 categories, often those that are around the national grids, grid extension for energy access. We're looking at mini grids or clusters. That's highlighted in red on this chart, and of course those that are more scattered out for solar home systems. So we're seeing kind of market segment into 200 million for 200 million Africans to be reached through solar home systems, 200 million through mini grids, and 200 million through grid extensions to hit SDG 7 as it stands today. Then want to kind of narrow that down one level further. So then let's look at the different power pools. So Africa is kind of divided into several power pools, and that's the way that supply and demand is looked at with relation to where opportunities exist. So in the, let's just say in the Southern African power pool, we have a tremendous deficit in power, almost 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts. So the number of opportunities that exist for small scale hydro and solar opportunities are quite profound. Given the lack of conducive regulatory environments that exist in many of those countries, there are tremendous opportunities for unsolicited proposals as well as tendered proposals. If we look at the West African power pool, there is also 2,000 to 3,000 megawatts of existing deficits in the national grids. And this is just talking about grid connected. From this chart, what it shows is that over the next, in the region, we can see that there's it's very, very clear that we're gonna have over 2,000 megawatts of additional power that will exist in the market. So what does that mean from a generation opportunity? Well, from first thought, you would look at it and say, well, there's very little opportunity. But the reason is that the investments that have taken place in generation have outstripped those that have been in transmission and distribution. So what's obvious is that there's lots of pockets that still exist for demand, and it's better for those opportunities to be hit by small scale or even by mini or even micro hydro or micro small scale solar opportunities to reach those areas that are not being met from the national grids. So it's important to look at which opportunities exist within each of the power pools, within each of the countries. And of course, we're not looking at one blanket market. The regulatory environments are very different in each one of these. One of the big questions that also comes up is what opportunities exist with regards to when there's a surplus in one country, a deficit in the other. I think one of the important things to look at is the East African power pool and its development, because there's going to be significant opportunities in the trading of power. So where Uganda might be in a place to have an extra 500 megawatts of power coming on grid, in Eastern Congo, there could be 20 or 30 mines that is just next door that could benefit from that electricity. There's possibilities then where we'll see in 5 years' time, certainly greater integration between the East African power pool, Southern African power pool, and Western African power pool. Just for example, in just west of what we see on this chart for Rwanda and Uganda and for Burundi, is that we have places like Lubumbashi and Kolwezi that have 1,500 megawatts of deficit in its power. Need for integration is there. That's where significant opportunities exist. And what we'll see are tremendous opportunities in more isolated pockets for the small scale hydro and solar power projects. Specifically, one of the opportunities is in the commercial and industrial areas. So the tariffs and the costs for power in each one of these markets are different. So in Rwanda, we might have some medium scale businesses that are still paying 25 cents a kilowatt. Which is about 5 times the price as it is in Canada, about 2 times the price that it is in Uganda. And what we'll see are pocketed opportunities for commercial and industrial growth, primarily met from solar power. Want to just kind of quickly highlight one of the technologies. So let's just say we narrow down and we say, okay, what are the opportunities in solar? Where the sun is there, and I think that if you look at radiation maps, if you look at the opportunities that exist, solar is the most rapid. You can develop it and finance it within 6 months. You can install it within 6 months. And it can be operational quite quickly. Hydropower, very different. It takes 2-3 years sometimes to develop the projects, 1 year to finance, 2 years to construct. But this chart highlights where we see the largest small scale opportunities in hydropower. So what exists in what has been highlighted by UNIDO is that 83% of what has been identified exists within East Africa. And so this is significant, and this is why we have a focus in East Africa, is that the majority of the projects that have been identified are here. And of course, given the first slides that we looked at from a generation perspective, certainly there will be greater and greater opportunities over the decades ahead. And as the tariffs come down, there'll be economies of scale to be reached for us. And what we see is that hydro and solar as a generation mix are kind of two of the key technologies that can meet and provide additional grid stability, especially when the generation is taking place from remote areas. As mentioned at the beginning, we're going to highlight Rwanda. Of course, if we were looking at this from a solar perspective, you'd see primarily on the eastern side of the small country, you would see that there's tremendous opportunities for solar. There's less population or less demand for the power. Rwanda is right now 50% with energy access, and Rwanda aims to hit universal access to power over the next 3 years. Using this as just one example, this is in a hydropower atlas that has identified 300 hydropower opportunities from micro, mini, and primary, and many of them small. So I want to highlight as an example what should be looked at when examining which opportunities to focus in on. What's important in each country or each place of looking at is to understand what the energy mix is. So certainly we can see that today, with 27% still dependent on diesel, that there are opportunities that exist. As we can see that the energy mix by 2024 is to reduce the dependency on diesel down to 5%. When I arrived into the market in Rwanda 10 years ago, the grid was about 60% reliable. It relied 60% on diesel fuel. So within the different markets, there's different opportunities that exist, and it's important to focus in on what the energy mix is if your focus is on generation, of course. So looking at Rwanda, we can see that there is about 50% that is planned to stay on hydropower. Then after, and our recommendation, of course, is when looking at a specific market in a specific area, is then to get down to the nitty-gritty to see what already exists and if there's a percentage of the market that is available for entering. So I'll just highlight these kind of two slides quite briefly, but we can see that there are 25 small hydropower projects that exist, so 23 IPPs. In this, we can see that depending on the date of when they were built, either in the 1960s or the 1970s or the 1980s or 2000s, we can see that many of these projects are in need of rehabilitation. And so these are existing projects that are here. And if we look at the next slide, the next slide, there's 26 other approved hydropower projects that exist. So every market will be different. Every site is different when it comes down to hydropower technologies. And so certainly the returns are different depending onto the CapEx. If we talk about solar versus hydro, they're two very different things. On hydropower, we'll see that on medium or large scale projects, you can get costs to $1.5 to $2 million per megawatt. If we talk about small scale renewables in East Africa, there's a great range from maybe 3 million per megawatt up to 5 or 6 million per megawatt. And of course, as we've seen on the solar power side, the prices have dramatically fallen, and we still need to see more advancements to be made in batteries. But certainly we've seen it level off on the solar side. And if we look at the costs of CapEx of developing, let's say, a 10 megawatt solar power plant, we'll see the EPC costs of that hit almost 600,000 to 700,000 per megawatt that is developed. And that's a dramatic, that's about 10 times reduction to what it was 10 years ago. When we look at the soft side costs of developing, actually the EPC costs of developing a solar power plant in East Africa is only 40 to 45% on the capex. The rest are financing and soft or development costs. This shows that there's tremendous opportunities to take place in the business development and business innovation. I promised today to, I'm just checking how much time that I have, but I promised to just kind of highlight one of the projects that we're doing and that we have built. And so I'll take a few minutes to go through this one. This was the first containerized hydropower plant that was developed in Africa. This is in the Nyabihu area of northern Rwanda. Just highlighting some of our partners. I think it's important to note that whether it's a solar, whether it's a hydropower project on the generation side, you'll find that by the time you've started developing the project and by the time you've commissioned it, you'll end up working with 20 or 30 different partners along the way. So that is one of the kind of key success factors in this business. So going to highlight some of the, maybe you had seen some from the video, of course, but on these run-of-the-river schemes, typically on the small hydro, you don't have these big dams and reservoirs. You typically take a portion or 90% of the water from the river, you divert it into a canal, a desilting tank. You'll bring it down a canal or a penstock from there through the powerhouse. And so I'm going to run through this project intake, just some different pictures from it. So this canal is about 700 meters long. All of the materials for this project we had found on the site. So one of the keys to keeping the cost per megawatt as low as possible is to maximize what is available for local resources. So the gravel, the stone was all found on site, including the sand. We were able to employ 1,350 people through the development of this 450 kilowatt power project. This is the desilting tank. One of the biggest issues or challenges that we face in all of the small scale hydropower projects in East Africa are primarily the silt in the rivers. So what takes place above the intakes is not in our control. It's outside of the project area. So often we'll see a tremendous amount of agricultural activities take place. When this happens and the rainy season comes, then we'll see a lot of erosion, and we'll see that the rivers pick up a significant amount of silt, and which can be very abrasive when going through the turbines. So these desilting tanks are very important in the design of these technologies. From the either 4-bay tank or from the desilting tanks, then we'll see the water carried through a penstock pipe. So this penstock pipe is about 800 meters in length. So this is the container powerhouse down there on the bottom right. We can see the area around the powerhouse. So the total net head that we had on this is 65 meters, and the design flow of this is 800 liters. We have specifically designed this project so that we leave some room around the container to bring in some small industries that can benefit from the power that is there. So over the next 5 years, we'll see the development of about 10 different small businesses that are coming in. We have the first one coming in next year, which will be a manufacturing setup for electric pressure cookers. So thank you very much. Just want to kind of look at this last slide and just kind of give a little bit of what this specific case study looks like. So this is a 2.5 million capex. It was designed for a plant load factor of 70%. We're seeing 2.4 gigawatt hours that are produced annually, with a sale at 13 cents USD per kilowatt. That is quite standard within Rwanda. Trends in the region is that we're seeing the prices fall to about 8 cents. One of the largest challenges with having cost-reflective tariffs is, of course, the utilities need to buy the power at a lower cost to sell the power affordably for industries. But one of the greatest challenges that is faced is certainly the cost of capital. And so that is one of the greatest stumbling blocks that exist. Specific to this project, we were able to get a 600,000 subsidy, 1.5 in debt financing, 400,000 through equity, and 15% IRR returns. So just wanted to highlight that we have some upcoming opportunities. We have a 5 megawatt project in Rwanda that's seeking senior debt. We have 4 containerized plants that are in design and final approval stages. We have 5 megawatts of different development that will be in containerized hydro and solar power mini grids. So we're seeing that developed across the region. For the moment, our base is in Rwanda. We have more than 100 employees and one of the largest growing engineering offices in hydro and solar. Apart from that, we are developing in more than 10 different countries. We see significant opportunities in not only the generation side, but certainly we see significant opportunities from industrial clients and mining clients that need affordable power and need to get off of diesel fuel. So feel free to reach out. Looking forward to some kind of questions or comments. Certainly we are very passionate, not only about generating power, but what power can do. And so we really see access to electricity as a tremendous way of fighting poverty. And this is what kind of brings many in our team to the table. We're always looking for partners, whether it's on the engineering side, whether it's on the project side, whether it's in solar or hydropower. So thanks, Phil. I'll pass this back to you. Looking forward to any questions or comments to highlight the opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So very interesting. And again, I'd like to encourage anyone, if you have any questions, please go ahead and click on the Q&A button and answer, put in your questions there. But just to start off with, I'd like to get a little bit more feeling about the retail side of your business. How do you see that developing, and what are maybe some new business models that you're looking at?
Very good. Thanks, Phil. So as the questions come in, I can highlight that one of the hardest thing as being a pure developer, which we started, is that we were first under the assumption that it would only take 1 or 2 years to develop a power project. And what we realized that sometimes we're in 5, 6, or 7 years, and we realized we need some other things to keep us busy. So on the retail side, what happened kind of by entrepreneurial accident is that we began to develop our own engineering products and services. From that, we began to look at where we see the market growing. So the containerized hydropower plant, and certainly the containerized solar power solution, which is still in development for us, we see a tremendous need for it. So this plug and play model is something where we see significant demand taking place in the market. Then what we did was we realized that these were best fitted where there's a lot of needs that are kind of greater or somewhere around the 100 to 500 kilowatt ranges. But what we did realize is, looking at the vast opportunities in mini grids, is that there's significant opportunities that exist in maybe the 5 kilowatt to the 25 kilowatt. So this had us really look at modular solutions for not only solar battery solutions, but also for us to be able to deploy around some of the small rivers. What we did see is that the majority of mini grid developers, which were going out into market, had a significant issue because there wasn't any kind of demand side stimulation. So if you're putting in that high of the capital costs, because as a utility of the future, then really you need to think in place where you're not only bringing in the power, but you're also bringing in productive use equipment. So the other retail side, we developed called Empower Pods. And so this is where we view, and as I mentioned in the first slide, is that the majority in rural population, and of course, the greatest opportunities for mini grids are for agricultural processing. So the idea was to match where we saw if we bring in the supply, we got to match the demand and bring in some microfinancing to see the opportunities exist. So this is where drying, threshing, and milling different agricultural products, and that would enable the rural communities to be able to export. So we've got a lot of retail focused around the mini grid opportunities, and we see a tremendous opportunity not only for where we see power as the main trading side, but really data. So as we see utilities that have existed over the last couple hundred years, they're mostly centralized, building outwards. And so where we see opportunities are for the smaller mini grid pockets of building towards the national grid, and that some of the main products and areas of focus are around data as much as it is electricity.
Interesting. So are you working at all with data people, like internet service providers or other people to be able to handle that data?
Yeah, so we've just kind of began kind of kicking off some of the communication. Of course, we're actively always looking for partners to enable these types of enable these solutions. But we are working with the local network, and we are working with a South African group called Axiom. And so that has been our focus for the time being, but certainly open for more partnerships.
Okay, great. And I think you mentioned a lot around what I think people call C&I, commercial and industrial. How about consumer retail opportunities?
Yeah, so as mentioned just kind of during the PowerPoint, is that we see that the end user in Rwanda is paying 32 cents a kilowatt hour. So, and I'm not sure what you're paying in California, but maybe it's 3 or 4 cents. So we're talking 10 times the price for the consumers for their power. So there's tremendous opportunities that exist. Not only those that are inside grid connected areas that are just trying to reduce their cost of power, but those that are outside. So when we talk about the cost per kilowatt or the cost of energy, they're paying for wood, charcoal, for energy that is used for cooking. These numbers are more like 50 times the price of what you're paying in California.
Wow. So I guess then the opportunity is to be able to replace that with lower cost energy, and hopefully open up some new opportunities for electrification for health and welfare and transportation.
Yes. Yeah.
Getting back to the generation side, one thing I noticed in your presentation, there was no mention of wind, which is obviously very familiar to people in Europe and North America. I was wondering, why is that?
Yeah, actually about 3 days ago. So when we talk about the small scale, so we're seeing there's been some excellent wind projects that were pulled off Lake Turkana. We're seeing some pocketed opportunities in different parts in South Africa and Ethiopia, of course. But when we talk about the small scale, the 1 to, let's say, 10 megawatt, there are actually some great opportunities that exist. It's like location. I was on the phone 3 or 4 days ago with Rift Valley. They're a very successful renewable energy developer that's based and has their own real utility in southern Tanzania. They've been successful. They just put in their own 2.4 megawatt wind system, which has helped to balance some of the loads on the hydropower. It's been very successful for them. We've not seen the right conditions that exist where we work in Uganda, Rwanda, Zimbabwe, and other places. But no, there are definitely pocketed opportunities that exist. And there's only a handful of developers that have been able to do it so far. On the small scale, I really only know of Rift Valley that has been able to pull it off.
Okay. Again, I'd like to encourage anyone, if you have any questions, go ahead and enter them in the Q&A button there. The one thing that I was just thinking about, you focused a lot on hydropower.
Hmm.
I imagine there, looking at climate change, certainly here in California, we've seen the effect of that on our grid here. I'm wondering if you're looking at what's the climate change risk around hydropower that you're looking at and how you're planning around that.
Yeah, so this is one of the top kind of questions that we get asked every time people look at the risk profile of our project portfolio. It's very different, again, location. What we're seeing is that there are tremendous challenges with the climate change. And where we've seen in Kenya and Tanzania on different projects is something that's very different in Western Uganda or Western Rwanda or Burundi. So along the Albertine Rift, we've seen very good conditions actually. And so while we've seen great rainfall data over the last 2 to 3 years, a significant uptick, we've also seen that the storms that come in are also very different. So when we design these small hydropower plants around Africa, you have to build them, even though your concession's only for 25 years. When you build a hydropower plant, it's a technology that's around forever, or it should be. So their building standards should be for 50 to 100 years on many of the aspects. So what we've seen with over the last 5 years, just the type of rainfall and storms that have come in is that we have to prepare the hydropower schemes to handle the 100-year flood. And so we commissioned last year on that containerized. We had almost the 100-year flood right afterwards. Wow. So that really drives up a bit of the capex with preparing the power plants for these types of flows.
And another thing I think, it's when I'm looking at some of the conditions, I think there are also applications, particularly here in North America, with the type of technologies you're looking at. Is there anything you could mention about that?
Technologies in North America.
No, yeah, I mean, it's not technologies, but also the type of business models and such. Looking at maybe applications that you might be able, that might be applicable to things happening here in North America as well, considering we have large rural areas that may not be fully electrified.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that had come up in one of our own previous conversations was around where we see that there's a lot of economic development that needs to take place. And so if we look at where we see jobs needing to be created, it's one thing about creating jobs during the construction or the development or the infrastructure planning. And certainly when you hear the words echoed in North America about the Green New Deal, it gets exciting to think about what opportunities exist in small scale renewables. When we think about the post-COVID-19 environment in Africa and just the risks that are present, because in North America, you can just hit print money. Trillion. Biden just needs another, $1 trillion to print. And I mean, what's amazing is that if we look, the capacity to do so, it means that there are amazing opportunities to make a green agenda and to see these types of infrastructure built, particularly in areas that need jobs. And so driving up cheaper power sources certainly is a way of protecting and ensuring kind of long-term economic growth and more jobs. In Africa, we don't just need like 100 million or 500 million or $1 billion band-aid about what's happened with the COVID crisis. Can just print maybe 200 million from Germany and 800 million from America. I think we would see a greater acceleration of the universal access to electricity. So the opportunities are tremendous. across Africa. And of course, when we talk about North America, I think that there are business models and innovation around the consumer side where you can get long-term financing. And so what we see is the cost of capital being far too high, and that drives up the cost of these projects and drives up the cost to the end user. So the cheaper the power is, the more energy will be used, and certainly that just has its natural development towards driving the economy.
Okay, well, I think unfortunately we've come up to the end of our time here. Dan, I really appreciate your taking the time, you know, and being able to elucidate us this. It's a very important and interesting area. And Caroline and Gaba, thank you so much for hosting us. And we hope to see everybody at the next Watson Waffles, or hopefully Watson Wines, once we're able to go back to in-person events. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.
And thanks, Dan.
Okay, signing off from Silicon Valley. Thanks again for everybody for attending.